Check 1, 2. I think we're live. Now we're seeing if my streaming software is connecting. There it is. Okay. That's probably from me. All right, we are live, folks. Welcome to. Oh, wait, I got to start with my intro music. Gosh, amateur. All right. Welcome to my little Ricks on a loop. How do I stop it? There we go. So my name is J.R. Forasteros. Obviously, we've got a few bugs to work out in this little experiment that I'm doing. But welcome to my live stream on Revelation. We are going to be exploring the revelation to John through the lens of what it's like to live under an authoritarian government, because I believe it's now relevant more than ever. So my goal is to keep these pretty short, like 10 minutes or less. And today I want to just kind of do a brief introduction to the book. So what is Revelation? Why are we all so scared of it? All that kind of stuff. Now, I should say I grew up in a church where when Revelation was taught, it was taught as probably what most of you are familiar with, the fire and brimstone that comes from the end of the world kind of spectacle stuff. And there was a lot of fear and anxiety around that as I was growing up. We learned that it's about the end of the world, and all of these amazing uh, kind of timeline and map of how things were going to happen. And we would learn that this was Russia, or that was the Antichrist, or whoever. It wasn't until a lot later, probably once I was in college and beyond, that I learned that Revelation is actually something very different from that. And that's what I want to talk about with you during the series: is what Revelation is and what it's not, and really how we can understand it in the sense of how it's useful today. So that's my ultimate goal, is to make Revelation something that is meaningful and beautiful, and actually something that's full of hope, because I believe that we have some commonalities with some of those ancient Christians who first received this letter. So let's talk about what this letter is, and then how we can best understand it. As I mentioned, this is a letter. It is a letter from a man named John, who was an elder Christian church. Now, there are a lot of people who will say that this is John, the disciple of Jesus. There's no actual good evidence for that. What we do know about this person is that he was a leader in the early church. We know that he was not a native Greek speaker. And we know that he is currently, at the time of the authorship of the letter, living on a small island called Patmos. And he says he is in exile for the word of God. So that probably means that he was teaching about Jesus and got persecuted to some degree by the Roman authorities, and then forced onto this island. So I want to show you a map of the ancient Roman province of Asia. This is modern day Turkey, because this letter is actually addressed to 7 churches. You can see them there: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And scholars have noted that these are on an ancient mail route. So it's likely that this letter was just sort of passed from church to church. Now, all of these churches are more or less in the same cultural context. They're living on the far eastern edge of the Roman Empire, which will actually be very important as we move through the book. And they're in a Greek-speaking part of the world. So they're Greek peoples who are living under Roman occupation, and many of them are Jewish. And so they're living in the Jewish diaspora, and they're recently, within the last generation or so, come to faith in Jesus and are being persecuted. Now, this is during the reign of the Emperor Domitian, and his persecution of the Christians was not systematic or systemic or even all that widespread. What we saw was like pockets of it. Now, a generation earlier, the Emperor Nero had executed a pretty intense persecution of Christians, and that caused a lot of anxiety and fear among the Christians. But this is about a generation later. We think that this letter was written sometime around 90, and so it's about 60 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. It's about 30 years after Paul and Peter were executed by Nero. But all of that is within the memory of, probably the living memory of, a number of these churches. And you'll see as we get into the book that there's some level of persecution, but it's not, it's not the like Christians being, fed to lions in the Colosseum and all that kind of stuff. So what we are seeing, however, is that Christians are a minority in their culture. This is a small upstart religion. Most of the Romans don't really see it as any different from Judaism, and so most of the Jews who do not follow Jesus at this point are trying to distance themselves from the Jesus Jews because the Romans are persecuting the Jesus Jews for reasons that we'll get into as we get into the letters to the churches. But so these Christians are kind of getting it from all sides, right? And they're having trouble remaining faithful. And so the primary question of the letter is, how do we remain faithful in a world that is against us? When the government is against us, when even a lot of our own friends and family are against us, what does it look like to remain faithful to Jesus? I think that's an important question for today because, again, we'll see as we get into the letters, there were teachers in these Christian communities who are advocating for a form of what we might call Roman Christian nationalism, that said that worshiping Caesar and worshiping Jesus are totally compatible. We can do these things together. There's no reason to choose between them, and it'll actually make us better. It'll actually keep us safe. And again, you can imagine that there's some strong corollaries to a lot of the white Christian nationalism we see today. And so those issues are going to come up again and again as we work through the book of Revelation, because John, the author of Revelation, rejects that perspective in no uncertain terms. And so we're going to have to wrestle a lot with what our own faithfulness looks like today as we find a government that's being wicked and oppressive, and as we see a number of Christians who are embracing and celebrating and advocating for that and telling us that Jesus approves. So those are some of the tensions that are going to be running through this whole book that I think are going to echo really strongly with our lived experience today. Now let's talk about what Revelation is, because this is where I think most people get tripped up. This is contrary to what a lot of people will say, this is not a vision that John had. John writes it as a vision, but this is actually a genre of literature that was super popular in Jewish and Christian circles from around 200 BCE to around 200 or 300 CE, and it's called apocalyptic literature. And this kind of literature was, think of it in the same way we have like fantasy and sci-fi literature today, right? Genre fiction, where if you read something and it's got dragons in it, or it's got a magic system in it, you're probably reading a fantasy novel, right? If you're reading something with rockets in it, or there's been some kind of climate catastrophe, you're probably reading some kind of sci-fi novel, either near future or far future. And these genres bring with them expectations. Well, Apocalypse worked the same way. It was kind of like ancient fantasy literature, but an apocalyptic literature always involves some kind of angelic messenger coming to a human and inviting them to look behind the veil of reality. It often involves some kind of a trip to heaven or hell or something like that. And the idea is to look behind the curtain and see like what's really going on. So I actually think the very best way to understand the book of Revelation is to go back to that classic film, The Wizard of Oz. If you remember, when at the end of the movie, when Dorothy and her friends come back to greet Oz the Great and Powerful, they're overwhelmed by this amazing figure of the spectral head that appears above the fire and is, I am Oz the Great and Powerful, and blah, 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 blah. And then little Toto runs over and pulls this curtain aside, and you see this like kind of pathetic old man like working all these levers and pushing these buttons and stuff. And he sees them see him, and he says, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But the illusion's already ruined, right? They realize that this fearsome figure that they've been afraid of is actually nothing but smoke and mirrors. It's illusions created by this old man who's playing tricks on everyone. And so as soon as they see the reality, the fear that Oz the Great and Powerful had engendered in them is completely defanged, and they're able to get to the truth of the matter. Well, that's more or less what the Revelation is doing. Revelation is taking us behind the curtain of reality to see what's really going on the cosmic stage. Because as far as all of these early Christians can tell, Rome rules the world. Rome is sovereign over everything. It's Rome's way, not Jesus's way. It's Caesar, not Christ. And so John is wanting to peel back the curtain and take his listeners behind the veil of reality to see what's really going on. And to do that, of course, he uses all of this amazing imagery, these crazy animals and these, locusts with demon heads and all this kind of stuff that I think can often feel off-putting to us. But I would suggest to you that you actually are better at reading this kind of stuff than you think as well. And it's because I want to show you this. This is a recent political cartoon that's criticizing the Democratic Party for the way that it is basically just instead of trying to get any real work done, it's just blaming Joe Biden for everything because now he's off the stage, right? So we have Joe Biden standing in the middle, and we have all of these donkeys with various, policies and things behind their back pointing at him in a circle, and it says, "Dems, circle the wagons and blame the old guy." Now, if someone were to look at this and say, wow, it's so weird that someone in 2025 believes in anthropomorphic donkeys that can wear business suits and author government policies and cast blame, right? Like, do donkeys even understand the concept of blame? You would say, don't be stupid. This is a political cartoon, right? This is using fantastical imagery to communicate some kind of deeper political reality. This is a long tradition we have. Look at this one that I found. This one is from the Prohibition era, and it says Prohibition makes strange bedfellows. And so you see a donkey looking in a bed and finding a donkey and an elephant who are both dry, and you see Republican elephant looking in its bed and seeing wet donkey and an elephant. And so again, you would say, does this person think that donkeys and elephants built how, like, did they build these homes? Were they built for anthropomorphic animals? And why are these animals in bed? No, we would say, like, you're missing the point if you think this is a fable about animals or something like that. This is about a political reality clear back from the 1920s. Here's another one from even further back. This one is this is the so-called Copperhead Party, and they are attacking Lady Columbia, who is an old way of depicting the U.S. And so again, whoever these Copperhead politicians were, right? They're threatening the Union, and the person who's drawing this does not actually believe in human snake hybrids, right? What they're saying is that whoever these politicians are a threat to America. Now, again, the further back we go in history, I think the harder it is for most of us to interpret these political cartoons, right? Because we're losing a lot of the cultural context. Here's a recent one. It's by a terrific author named Raima Suprani. She's from Venezuela. And you might be wondering who this is. Now, again, if I didn't tell you anything about this artist or this person or where they're from, you could probably get a lot of this, right? Because you recognize, oh, that's Lord Voldemort, and that's the ghost face from Scream, and it looks like we got Michael Myers and Chucky and Freddy and Hannibal Lecter and Darth Vader. These are all villains, right? Clearly they're villains. And then there's that guy in the back, right? Kind of looks a little bit like Saddam Hussein. I think it's not Saddam Hussein, right? It's actually the current president of Venezuela, Maduro, who, again, a lot of people have been criticizing for his authoritarian policies. And so this person is drawing him in there. And if you were Venezuelan, you would immediately recognize him. And whether you supported him or not, you would understand what this cartoon was trying to depict. We, because we lack the cultural context, can look at that and say, like, I mean, I get the basic, I don't know who that guy is, right? But I understand whoever he is, this artist thinks he's a villain. Well, friends, this is basically what's happening in the book of Revelation. We are reading more or less ancient political cartoons that are meant to depict a particular reality that's meant to encourage us in the face of authoritarian governments. And so what we're going to do during this series is work really, really hard to understand the original context of these cultures. And we can't do that perfectly because we don't have a time machine, but we've done a lot of work in the last 2,000 years, particularly in the last couple of hundred, to really understand these ancient worlds. So we're going to look back and understand, what do these ancient symbols represent? What would they have communicated to a primarily Jewish audience that lived in the diaspora? What would have communicated to people who lived under the heel of the Roman emperor? And then most importantly, what truth are they trying to communicate that helps us to live faithfully in the faiths of authoritarianism? I'm really excited about this series. I think you're going to like it too. I think you're going to be surprised how much Revelation is enjoyable, how much it's meaningful, and how encouraging it is in our current political moment. So again, these videos are going to be free throughout the run of this series, but if you would like to subscribe, you're welcome to my Holy Pop Culture newsletter. You're going to be getting tons of other fun stuff there and just helping me support these things. Thanks for watching. In the comments, I'd love to hear what you think of the book of Revelation, how much experience of it you have, maybe what some of your favorite political cartoons are, and just kind of get the conversation started. So this one ran a little long because I was trying to work out some bugs, but we're going to be back next week, and we're going to dive into the first chapter where we have this pretty intense picture of Jesus. So I'll see you next week. Until then, grace and peace be with all of you.